and we are live now. So awesome. Got some people hopping
Awesome.
already. Um,
Mhm.
Stoked to talk to you today. But like, yeah, we first met through this group under Chris Lee. Chris Lee has been on, of course, many podcasts, but I found him originally through a friend of mine that's on Substack. Her name is Gina Kazaza, and she has a podcast called Mindset Lessons in the Field. And when I asked her,
Yes.
I ended up being on her podcast as well. But beforehand, before I hopped on, I asked her, like,
Oh,
just wanted to understand her format and guests she's talked to. I'm like, tell me about some of your favorite guests so far. First thing she said, without reading it, Chris Lee. Got to listen to Chris Lee episodes. Then she gave me a bunch of others because she's had phenomenal guests, including Nick as well back in the day.
yeah.
So I
Yes.
listened to Chris. He was great. And I learned about how he had the book, Beyond the Battlefield, read that, loved him already reading the book, but at the end, he had that QR code. And so the QR code was for a 15-minute call with him, did that. That call ended up being over an hour, and then we talked again. And then, of course, that led in to the group that you and I are both part of. And yeah, that's where I met you. Of course, the group is full of really impressive and interesting people, but my goodness. And I'll share the story about our first call together and how you blew my hair back and how interesting and amazing you
I'm
are.
always scared because I'm a bit of a loose cannon, so I'm scared what I said on that first call.
It was awesome. I got off the call, immediately texted Chris. I'm like, man, Nadia is awesome. He was like, oh hell yeah. And like, you don't even know half of her story yet. My wife had heard part of it. She was like, who is that girl? She sounds awesome. It's like, yeah, she is. And now every time we're on a group call together, including yesterday, yeah, the wisdom that you share, the perspectives you have, and of course where they come from and the trials that you've been through, it just speaks to like what is possible in the human condition. And obviously, you're calling right now from South Africa. I'm curious, are you born and raised, or is that later in life? Yeah,
Yes,
born and
yes,
raised South Africa.
absolutely. I was born and raised. So it's a beautiful country, interesting country, with many facets, but it's absolutely incredible. No, so I've been here born and raised, and I'm probably about fourth generation at least. So yeah,
So cool.
but it's a beautiful place.
Tim Noakes is the name
Absolutely.
of exercise
Yes.
physiology. So yeah, so big fan of him. Love his books. I mean, he has done so much when it comes to research and changing myths and knowledge around all things human performance. So that he put South Africa on the map for me when I found him back in the day. But of course,
My
sports and
goodness.
culture. Yeah, love the idea of getting
I
out
haven't
South
heard his
Africa.
name in a while, but yes, no, he's very sort of revered. Yeah.
Legend for sure. So tell me about your kind of
Amazing.
origin story. Like, so obviously born and raised South Africa. Tell me about young Nadia coming up to today's day and age.
Young Nadia was, I was, I must say, I was a very, I was actually a people pleasing kid. So I grew up with my dad's a doctor and my mom was a teacher. So, um, but my dad sort of, he's unfortunately bipolar and has some personality disturbances. So it was an interesting presence in the home and a lot surrounded that. So I learned very early on to sort of navigate people and navigate emotions and navigate, what is safe and how to make a situation safer and, those types of things. Not necessarily physically, but, emotionally and to spot and it served me well, but it's also not an ideal position for a child to be in. Sorry, those are my dogs playing.
No,
And
no, sure.
so they so it was so I was a tomboy. Well, I loved ballet, but I was a tomboy as well. So what I know of Tim Noakes is I loved rugby and cricket, and he was obviously very involved with the cricket teams. So that's why I'm well aware of him. But I, at the same time, as tomboy as I was at that stage, I did ballet. So it was sort of this contradiction, um, all the way. And I did fairly well at school. Well, I did well on paper, put it to you that way, but I didn't at that stage. I knew that I had struggles with learning, but I still did well. So I hid it extremely well that there was a struggle. And so I sort of harbored, and as I went to university, sort of it got a little bit exasperated, but I harbored this sort of deep, dark fear of actually being dumb. Someone will realize that I'm dumb because I do really well, but it takes me a significant amount of time to learn. So I was head girl, which is it's sort of more to the English school system, but it's you're selected by your peers and teachers. You don't like lobby for it or anything. And it's basically like your student council chairperson or whatever, the female. And it was so it is a very, so in theory, I was like really I was accomplished, I did well at school, I did well at my extracurricular activities, etc. But I always sort of felt a little bit out of sorts, and as if people didn't realize that perhaps I had this intellectual deficiency only later to learn as ADHD. But I was a really good child. So I wasn't your typical, my mom's actually a special ed teacher. And so she never, and because they were so strict, or my mom was extremely strict, just from a manners perspective, not in a bad way, but it was, listen, you don't bother the friend next to you, etc. So I didn't express the normal behavioral patterns that you would have easily been able to pick up on. Looking back, she said now it makes sense to her. But I was a really good child because I just didn't want to get into trouble. So that was the main thing.
So you
So, but
you
I
were
was,
eventually
I was,
diagnosed with ADHD, but you were originally misdiagnosed, right? When did the misdiagnosis
yeah,
come? And is that beyond education, during education? When did that happen?
it was after education. So I was about 29 at the time. And I was misdiagnosed because I battled with bouts of depression. And today I reframe that as being, it was more an identity crisis than depression. But so the issue with ADHD, it does have a new component to it. So unfortunately, that is something that's often missed. So in ADHD, people are normally sort of kind of very flamboyant and all over the show often, and so and that unfortunately aligns a little bit with bipolar and mania and all of those aspects. So it was misdiagnosed because it was done on family history. It was, unfortunately, the treating doctor was sorry, the kids.
Oh,
The
you're good.
treating doctor had treated my dad before, and unfortunately made the diagnosis based on because I was struggling with depression at that stage, and made it as a bipolar diagnosis. And then so I drank Epitech and Wellbutrin and Brintellix and all, mood stabilizers, and they would just up the dosages. And at the end of the day, it ended up just being ADHD. I was diagnosed secondary with ADHD, but unfortunately, they made the primary diagnosis bipolar, and you find that more and more. So now, when I meet people that say I've got both, and I would always say, which one were you diagnosed with first? And they would always tell you bipolar, and I would always say, well, this is my story. Perhaps just have it checked out. So I was slowly weaned when we finally discovered the the misdiagnosis, or started sort of doubting the diagnosis. I was weaned off the medication and just sort of felt better and better, at least physically, and and clearer of mind. And because I was being weaned off of all of the medications, and amazingly enough, the anxiety disappeared. So, and that was sort of the key thing. And I've been off of all of the meds now for probably almost 2 years actually. Almost to the day. So it's a so yeah, it was an interesting path to get just to an ADHD diagnosis. It was later in time, but to give you an idea, at university I was on the dean's merit list. So, but I was just struggling to get those marks. But I did incredibly well. But I got book prizes and all of those, and but I had to learn extremely hard. It was like 3 pages an hour. So I always had this thing of, at some point someone's going to figure out I'm dumb. And meantime, it was literally just as simple as ADHD. But I didn't have all the other, the behavioral thing necessarily that unfortunately would have given the game away at that stage. So, but that cost me kids because I couldn't fall pregnant with a bipolar medication. If I would have, there would have been severe disability. So I wasn't allowed to ever fall pregnant.
How
So,
how
and
long
which was so
how long were you treated for
11,
bipolar disorder before they weaned you off?
11 years.
11 years. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So it was a
Long time.
long time. So unfortunately, by the time, yeah, it's a lot of lost time. And it's, for example, the baby journey was particularly sad because, we didn't want to take the risk of leaving the medication. And, t- and then never mind fall pregnant on that medication. You can sort of say la vie and hope for the best, but it wasn't a risk that we were willing to take. And it would have been severe disabilities, especially I think with the epithet was the big culprit. So we had to make the call to not have kids, and that was, I think, sort of devastating, because it was something it wasn't that I was physically incapable of having children, but I basically wasn't allowed to for practical purposes. So it was something for us to really work through, and the people, like, at some stage we disclosed that we couldn't have children, and obviously people would have questions. I was too embarrassed to ever disclose my diagnosis. So I would just always say, and which I suppose technically is the truth, is I won't be able to carry a baby.
Yeah.
I can fall pregnant. I'm not infertile, but I won't be able to carry a baby. And people abided by that, and shame it. Everybody would always say, but why? At least you can adopt. And I knew it wasn't an option, because who would choose me? And it was that embarrassment of, if you have 5 healthy mothers, why would you choose the bipolar ADHD one? And with all due respect to myself and to others in that position, I wouldn't expect that of a mom to necessarily choose me out of a group, despite my career, despite my financial ability, etc., and my lovely personality. That only takes you so far. So it was the embarrassment of just knowing, or the shame, not embarrassment, it was shame of thinking, but who would choose me? But everybody always sort of just said that you can adopt, you can do this, you can do that, and it was always, I just couldn't tell them why that was an option.
Yeah, and I can only imagine
So
you
yeah.
mentioned the history of depression, and more so, I love the reframe to an identity crisis. Really like that, but I can only imagine that during this time, your identity was challenged significantly, just based on the circumstance and the diagnoses and the medication and what you wanted from life, but couldn't safely pursue because of it. I'm sure that was challenging in and of itself.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the saddest things to accept. Um, and that was the one loss, I think, through the bipolar journey, that obviously that's irreparable. I mean, it's not something I can't turn that clock back, and especially knowing that I was able to have kids, that it was a mistake. So, but I will also say this: I look at my life now, and the subsequent, if I look at some stage of a divorce, um, sorry, my animals just I clearly have no control of my animals, and
It's all good.
so at some at some stage, with a divorce, I don't think I would have gotten that divorce if I had children.
Yeah.
And the divorce was the best thing for me. So I wouldn't have made that decision. And I also would have had a much tougher time during the cancer battle if I had children. So my life it was, to some extent, it was a blessing that wasn't on the cards.
It's funny, you just mentioned a few things that we'll talk about in much more detail, because it sounds like we've been talking
Yeah.
about your big trials already, and no, these just led up to your biggest trials. But you're already
Mm.
like, the reason why I admire you in the short amount of time I've gotten to know you is you are a walking example of, you get to choose how you tell your story. And you do not have an easy story. And you had these things that were important to you that you weren't able to do out of a mistake, not out of objectively that you couldn't do them, but life handed you a hand that you played as well as you could with what you had, and then you learned things down the line, and that could cause some significant angst, significant misery, because you can't turn back time. But you choose to tell your story in such an empowering way and draw lessons from it to make yourself better, and make others better. And again, I would totally empathize and understand if you decided not to do that. But of course, we wouldn't know each other, and you wouldn't have the impact that you're having, not only on others, but most importantly, yourself. Um, Before we start talking about your recent trials, we were talking recently about how you found Chris. I'd love like, how what basically led us to meet each other. How did you find Chris joining that group? When did that happen in relation to kind of like age, or how long ago, and just everything related to you finding Chris, and then where what led into everything else after the fact?
So as I was being weaned off of the medication, sort of went through that period. I The numbness of the medication, because it does create a bit of a cloud. So nothing ever penetrates or bothers you enough for you to actually change it, although you are in this sort of persistent state of discontent. So I always say, if psychiatric medication's main goal is for me not to kill myself, that is excuse my word, but fucking low bar. Um, if it doesn't make me thrive, that's not treatment. And I should have called it at some point, saying this isn't making me thrive. It's just keeping me right there. It's just stopping me. It's just keeping me just comfortable enough not to kill myself. But you don't have true joy, and you don't have true despair. So, and if you have despair, you move. And that's why I appreciate despair so much these days, because you actually move. So during that process, I got frustrated in looking at my circumstances and really realizing a lot of it was of my own doing, at least whether it was by my own hand or whether it was by my tolerance of certain things. The things that I weren't happy with, I had no proper way, or I had to basically take control, acknowledge my role in it. So, but I was also incapable of changing my own behaviors. So simple things is I would promise myself every day, today I will eat healthily, etc. I will look after myself, blah, blah, blah. Never did it. Like every time I would break that promise to myself, every single time. So, I mean, and that's just the small promise, never mind the bigger promises. Not realizing how big that promise is that you break to yourself. So, and how impactful that is. And so ultimately, out of sheer desperation, I contacted Nick Lavery, and I said to him, "Listen, do you do one-on-one coaching? I'm at a point where I have to change, but I just don't know how, and I'm frustrated with myself." And he said, "Well, he's unfortunately fully booked, but he's got this friend." And I sort of like blew it off, thinking, "Oh, like dude, I contacted you. This was, especially it's so random that I actually knew of him." And I just thought, okay, fine, send me the guy's details. It's okay. And I truly, I wasn't actually intending to contact him, because I thought, well, this is a sign, but I was sort of at the end of my tether, and it wouldn't have been a decision I made out of depression. It was a decision of the immense frustration that I was feeling and not changing my circumstances, my inability to actually take action and just change things. And but Chris then emailed me one day and said, "Don't you just want to hop on a call?" And I thought, and I was having a particularly bad day, and I just thought, you know what, this is one thing I haven't tried. I've tried coaching before, but I haven't tried coaching with him. It's worth a shot. I'll probably won't finish it. I probably won't, all my old patterns, but it's fine. I'll let me just meet him. And I remember saying to him on the first call, "Listen, I'm a 3-ring circus. Do you know what you're signing up for?" And apparently to this day, he says to himself, "How bad can it be?" I was like, "Well, I showed you." And, and, so I signed up for the coaching. It was the best decision I ever made. Because on the first session, he required this whole thing about the identity thing. And I said to him, "Dude, well, because we needed to write down those affirmations. I don't know if you've been through coaching with Chris, but you have to do these affirmations." And I was like, "You are expecting me to lie at this point, because none of this is true." And I was like trying to give him almost my whole repertoire of failures before and how I haven't done any of these things. And now I'm expecting to project this somehow into the future. That sort of nonsense of affirmation. I honestly thought it was bullshit. But I thought I'd stick to the process and it's fine, but I will. And eventually he pressed me so hard, and I was like, "I just want to be someone that shows up for herself, that I can trust, and that was almost my core affirmation. And then through the affirmation process, I sort of took my identity and I said, "Okay, fine. I'll do what he said, and I'll take it as a point of faith." But I went and I basically decided, what did God say I was? And what do other people say of me? And then I literally stripped down my entire character and said, "Do people say I'm friendly?" Which I am. But am I friendly out of joy, or am I friendly because I'm managing people? Am I busy? It's almost a subtle form of manipulation to keep me safe. So is that what I'm doing? Similarly with humor, I have a great sense of humor, but do I have a sense of humor, or do I hide behind it? So I literally stripped down those elements of character, and I said, well, I will only be friendly if it comes from a point of joy. So I wrote these affirmations, and my brain latched onto it. I hate to admit it. It latched onto it incredibly well. And it's actually just, I basically took biblical sort of principles of what God said I am. Although I somehow didn't believe it of myself, I knew that He was speaking the truth though. So, but I wasn't feeling that about myself. But I thought I'll take those and I'll formulate those affirmations. And my brain, by God's grace, took hold of those affirmations, and my behavior changed literally instantly. It was the strangest thing. When it came to meals, I would literally, it was my question to myself would be, and that would be pretty much everything. Meals, exercise. I mean, I was not someone that liked movement, but that was one of my affirmations at that point, because I was, and I loved sweet things. I loved everything. And it was literally, I would look at a meal and say, is this something that is reflective of that identity? I've chosen this woman, this is my identity now. So, or this is the person that I'm hoping to go with. And ultimately it was just, is it someone that can trust yourself and value yourself with integrity? Does this speak of a woman that has respect for herself? And it was something that I initially, maybe for the first 2 days, I consciously as a measurement. And after that, the decision making just flowed so naturally. So I never followed a diet. I never followed a training program. I said to myself, I will not, because I also know myself very well and I'm very honest. So I said, I'm not going to do it by way of a diet or a program, because I didn't want to stop eating or start eating anything that I wasn't willing to do forever. And that was the main point, that they needed to be balanced. And otherwise, I was just setting myself up for failure. So I'm a bit like a naughty child. If you restrict me completely, then it's the one thing I want to do. So I was like, I won't take anything off the table, but it must be the best decision at the point. And in that way, I somehow connect or disconnected or discarded sort of that emotional connection I had with food. And I always said I had a affair with food. I used it as my sort of celebration, as comfort. It had some role to play. Never fulfilled the role, but I was very, very adamant to see if I could prove it wrong. And literally, I used it as a sort of a therapy of sorts. Never did that purpose. Made me feel like shit. Never, truly, never served the purpose. And I realized through that I was, when I treated food purely for what it was, when I used it solely for the purpose it was intended, and that's nourishment, it made my food choices different. It made because it didn't have to be, all kinds of tasty and spectacular. Is it for nourishment? Is this to help me better perform? Or is this to somehow fill some emotional void? Because guess what? It doesn't. That whole, you need to self-soothe, my friend. So, and when I started behaving in relation to food, that it purely fulfilled the role that it was created for, I had no inclination to overeat or to overindulge or even to eat certain groups of food that I was very adamant to eat every single day. So it was incredibly easy. So through this whole process, and this was completely unrelated, thank God, to the cancer, but unrelated to cancer, weight loss was like 45 kilograms. So that's close to 100 pounds. I think you guys work in pounds. So, but it was the easiest thing I'd ever done. And I would never have said that in my life. If I didn't go through the process of weight loss and training, because I started just walking with a weighted vest. I initially did sort of these ankle and leg weights and just went out onto the golf course. I live next to a golf course, so I would just go walk. And later I got a weighted vest and I would just walk. And it's such a lazy way of exercise. I still say to Chris, I will never do a squat. Who does a squat? No, I love it. But I had to go back and admit that they're actually quite spectacularly effective. And but it was, I did it in such a simple way, but it was literally the only thing that played in my mind was, is this the woman that shows up for herself?
I love
And
it.
the world started moving differently around me. The moment I had that switch in my mind, it's like everybody knew something changed. And it was initially people chalked it up to weight loss. And then I think later on people saw it's literally just, I call it a DNA change, because it was so fundamental and it was effortless. It
Oh,
required yes, it was incredible. So that's why I say the depression thing wasn't, I always held this hidden belief of I wasn't good enough. I was, someone's going to find out I'm stupid, etc., etc. And that was causing me a tremendous anxiety. And that's why I would always say, I'm not entirely sure that was as much depression as it was just a broken identity. Because when I corrected that identity and had a correct perspective of myself, I never thought of, I never had suicidal ideation again. Never, and I've never fallen into, I've had times that were harder than others, but I've never felt this, depression. I've had despair, but not depression. And despair is appropriate under certain circumstances.
which you've had
So
many.
it was very, yeah. So to me, it was just, but I had such pockets of joy within that despair. And despair I love now. I truly, and it sounds weird, or I definitely don't want it, but I do embrace it when it comes around, because those were the moments I moved, and it forced me to move. And through despair, I did that identity change, and it changed my life. It truly, I built a completely new life.
So many pearls of wisdom, as always, when you talk. I could riff on so many things that you just said, and I love that you mentioned like such a lazy way of exercising, which is the best way to start exercising. Find something that feels lazy, but you're moving, and weighted movement while walking is such a wonderful way to do that. Just walking, let alone adding weight to it. Heck yeah! But
It was
are
amazing.
what you're really alluding to is like changing yourself from the inside out can be so much more effective across domains rather than take outside solutions like this fad diet, this exercise program, this goal setting system. No, you changed your identity
Yeah.
while working with Chris, and then it allowed decisions related to that identity to be made by you for you. And as you mentioned, your relationship with food changed, and your relationship with being lazy and exercising changed, which actually you're getting after it, but you're making it feel easy for you so you could
Yeah.
start doing that. When did you first start working with Chris? How long ago was that?
So this was it was the 22nd of November, 2023.
So,
So I call
so
it my
not even
rebirth.
2 years
That
ago.
was definitely my rebirth. Absolutely, yes. So
Wow.
it was 2 years ago. And just a point of the identity thing is, uh, people expect, like, people see weight loss, and they think that they gain confidence when the weight is lost. No, I gained confidence and then I lost the weight. So I became happy, and I defined the identity, and I found myself, and then I lost the weight.
Love it.
So it's not something you find, because if you don't fix that identity, you will lose all the weight. So you will reach the goal, but um, you won't, it's not going to change anything fundamentally in you. So what will happen is eventually you'll pick it up again. But with mine, I never even had the concern that I would pick it up again, because it was literally, it was fundamental to who I was. It wasn't something that that I did just to achieve. I didn't even realize when I reached, because I never weighed. I refused to weigh, because I said to myself, it's not an issue. It's not everybody said I was over 40, etc. There's no way that you'll lose weight. So to me, it wasn't the issue. Wasn't the losing weight. The issue was showing up for myself, making decisions in food and in life that were respectful of myself. So the issue was, I wasn't concerned about the actual figure on the scale. It was being healthy that I was concerned about, and obviously it would hopefully naturally follow. But I was never concerned with the scale. I only weighed really for the first time shortly. Yeah, I think I was about 30 kilograms down by the time I weighed for the first time, because it was irrelevant to me. I was prouder of of my consistent decision making, and of the woman I had chosen to be, as opposed to the actual figure on the scale, because that was irrelevant.
I love everything
Because I
about
already gained my confidence.
because it's not you're removing outcome based happiness. Like it can either be process related, but even underneath the process, the identity based happiness, the being proud of yourself based on your choices. I mean it's such a beautiful concept that we can all apply to our lives. And what's funny is you were talking about our medical system, which has a lot of pros to it and man a lot of limitations. And like you said, when it comes to medical management of certain diseases, certain pathologies, and definitely when it comes to certain mental health disorders, you said the bar is really freaking low. I mean, it usually is around survival, definitely not around thriving. And there is no medicine that's going to help you thrive. There are performance enhancing
No.
things, but even then, performance enhancing drugs don't help you thrive necessarily when it comes to your spirit and your soul. It might physically help you
No.
do more things, but still, there's that identity within you. So, thriving anything that diminishes your capacity to feel, your capacity to reflect, your capacity to tell your story in a way that makes sense to you and feel the whole spectrum of emotions, like you said. Like, you're thankful for despair because despair allows you to realize true joy. But having the ability to truly experience and reflect on that, that's how we get to thriving. But what thriving is for me versus you, that requires a lot of questioning, a lot of reflection, and a lot of introspection on your identity and changing yourself from the inside out. And you're a walking testament to that. And it's wild that it was less than 2 years ago, because at the time that you met Chris, were you still in your mind cancer free, and were you still married at that time too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So incredibly, with in relation to the cancer, so when we actually did discover it, we I asked them more or less, how long has this thing been? Yeah, and amazingly, it probably started around the time I actually started making the changes. So it was just a lucky coincidence that I wasn't just feeding it even further. So where it was in a particularly aggressive one. So at least at maintaining a lifestyle at that stage that wasn't just sending it into overdrive was such a blessing. So no, I was still, for all practical purposes, I was cancer free, fat and happy, initially, and then later thin and happy. But by in January, so we went through the whole identity process. I'm very clear on my purpose, etc. I'll explain the whole purpose thing to you just now, but it's very clear on my identity, very clear on my purpose, but I couldn't set my goals. And I was really getting stuck. And eventually I was sort of taking it out on Chris, and I was like being all huffy because I can't get these goals set. And I realized that I couldn't set it because of my marriage. So I was continuously having to sort of um, get involved in his business and those types of things. So I didn't have any predictability of just setting my goals and pursuing it. We would sort of constantly, pursuing his, and and there was no traction. And I just realized that my marriage was the problem. So it was a process. I had a discussion with Chris about it, and and he was such a gent in proposing, saying, listen, perhaps you must, have you spoken to your husband about this? And because the main thing, Carl, in my marriage was the boy I married stayed the boy. He unfortunately never grew with me. And it was his full right to stay exactly the same. So it was, but I sort of continued to grow, and just grow up really. And he stayed the boy, and he's a very decent guy, etc. But I think we were probably not compatible to begin with, in all honesty. So it was, and in this discussion, I honestly didn't realize how far I was or how frustrated I had become, because I was never willing to acknowledge it. And then when I sort of broached the topic with my husband, because I promised that I would have, because Chris just said it's really unfair to him if you are feeling a particular way and you are not disclosing that. Because we were always very respectful to each other, and we had a good relationship, a friendship, but it wasn't, there truly wasn't actually depth, if I now look back in it. And but we really did love each other, but it wasn't, it wasn't there was a lacking depth in it, for sure. And we so I had a discussion with him, and during this discussion he said to me, listen, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure, what do you want? Do you want a divorce? And when he said that, I said, you know what? Yes, that's exactly what I want. And it really only came to me in that moment, and I realized people wouldn't even, because at some point during the divorce, he said, how long have you been dating this? I'm like, dude, not at all. I'm as surprised as you are that I made that decision. And it sounds terrible, but it sounds very impulsive, but it wasn't. I just don't think I was willing to acknowledge how far I had come at that stage and how frustrated I'd become, and that I realized nothing was ever going to change.
How long have you
So,
been
and that
married?
I needed 14 years. We had been together about 16, 17 years. So, and I just realized I had changed significantly during that period of coaching, it was truly a DNA change. And the whole world could see it, but somehow he missed it. So, I could see that we weren't on the same page at all, and we weren't, or even in the same direction. And, and so I made a call that day, and I was surprised that I'd made that call, but immediate relief settled, immediate. And, so I think it was just something that I had probably knew was necessary for a long time, but I didn't even allow myself to think about that because, you know, I'm not the type of person that would make a decision only for me. Because I would be blowing up his life and those types of things. And but I did it, and we we separated.
Let me just try to lay out
Right.
what we've just talked about so far leading up to around January of 2024. So you are quite successful in school, even though it was really challenging for you. You didn't know why. You kept it hidden to yourself, eventually, due to probably an underlying identity crisis, maybe genetic susceptibility due to things in your family. You were misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder in your late 20s. You were then medicated for
Mm.
that. You had the secondary diagnosis of ADHD, but you were medicated for bipolar disorder. You were already were you married at this time, but you were already with your husband?
I was with my husband at the time of diagnosis. So he always joked and said, well, he didn't know what he was signing up for. So,
So you
um, but he was always the one that said, listen, you are just not what you would expect from a bipolar person. So, I would have bouts of lows, but there was no irrationality. And I would always say to him, please, if I do anything and I ever blame bipolar, I know exactly what I'm doing. Like if I, for example, overspend, I know every cent that I spent. So, it is my money, but I'm very well aware. So please don't allow me to ever tell you that I did this because I'm bipolar, because that's not true. Like I was always very honest that I still had accountability. I knew what I was doing. I'm not schizophrenic. So, and that's sort of how I always explained it to myself. And meantime, I was a terrible representative of bipolar because it wasn't true.
so
So
three no,
I created the wrong
but like
impression.
so you had this feeling, yet for 11 years you are medicated for bipolar disorder. So through
Yes.
your 30s, you are on medication that prevents you from safely becoming pregnant. You wanted to do that, but were unable to do that safely, so decided against it. Battling with that, managing that, and the medications, I'm sure the side effects that they would cause anyway, through your 30s. And then they finally re diagnosed you as ADHD, started weaning you off those medications, at which time that's around when you started pursuing potential one on one coaching and identity cultivation. And you met Chris. Working with him, you changed your identity a little bit. You started losing the weight naturally, which I want to talk about food quite a bit more after we get beyond some of the recent trials. But and then as you get off these medications and over a decade of them, you lose weight, you're getting your life back together, and then you get diagnosed with what type of cancer?
So it is breast cancer, but it's triple negative breast cancer. So it is a non-hormonal breast cancer, but and your most aggressive one. So my friend, when we initially were waiting for the histology result, um, I said to her, I'm not understanding what these hormone markers are that they are waiting for. She said, no. So we're trying to figure out because my mammogram was clear. So I found a lump in the arm and so we weren't sure it was breast cancer. I assumed then that was the primary cancer. So that the initial results I got back was saying, this is a cancer, it's cancer, it's spread. Um, we don't know what your primary cancer is. We're doing further histology testing to see because they had done a biopsy out of the lymph nodes under the arm. So and I said, so I don't know what these hormone markers are. And she said, okay, no, that they now at the point where they know it's breast cancer, they're trying to figure out which one. And she sent me this beautiful breakdown because she's a specialist doctor in Cape Town, and she gave me this lovely breakdown, simple breakdown of the different type. I didn't even know the different types, but these are the different types of breast cancers. And this, and she still went with the one. This is the one you don't want, but it's rare, so it's and it wasn't a few minutes later. It came through. It's triple negative. this is not exactly what I signed up for.
Man.
So then we knew I was in trouble because I mean we found it in the lymph and the likelihood of further spread. So a triple negative immediately is a grade 3 cancer. At the stage of diagnosis, I was already at stage 3C. So I was very, very, very close to being terminal because stage 4 would really have been me if it had spread to distant organs. So, but I had significant lymph node involvement and stuff.
So you're dealing with this new battle, this new challenge. Who cares about your goals that you're trying to create? You got a new goal to take on this cancer while you're simultaneously dealing with divorce. Um, Tell me about
Yeah.
the past 2 years and that battle with the cancer.
So the the cancer came at a perfect time. So just when I found the I was playing with my dog, so and I felt it felt like a ball of cotton wool. It wasn't sore, it wasn't anything. And in that moment, my brain took notice of it. Um, but I didn't even think about it again. In about 2 weeks, all I said to myself, amazingly enough, not that it's something I track incredibly closely, but I'm out of my cycle. That's for some reason that thought was in my mind. Not that I traditionally even got lumps during cycle, but some women do, and I'm over 40, so I thought maybe, but it was such a fleeting thought. No, no, sort of not to my stomach or anything. I just thought, it was literally a period of taking note of it. And about 2 weeks later, I did a movement like this again at the dining room table, and I felt it again. I thought, ooh, I forgot about that. And then I was on my cycle. So I just did this, and I was like, ooh, I thought maybe the other one's the same, and just felt on it, the optimism. And the first thought that came, firstly, spoiler alert, the other one wasn't the same. So, the first thought that came to mind was, this is going to be inconvenient. And the second one is, I'm literally as strong mentally, physically, and spiritually as I've ever been. So if I have to fight this fight, I'll fight it now. And but for some reason, I just knew. When I did that, I knew. So we obviously went through the process of I went to the GP and then I went to get the ultrasound and all of that, and it was finally discovered. So, but I was truly the healthiest I'd ever been. So I remember going to the office the next day, because I let my bosses eventually know when it was determined that it was a cancer that was spread. I went to the office and I was the most senior woman there, so I sort of spoke to the people in small groups and just said, listen, this is all I know. I don't even know what cancer it is yet, but yeah, I'm in a bit of trouble. So, but it's not something I can hide. Everybody will see it soon enough. But yeah, just be patient with me. And I asked them that I just didn't want it to be treated like a patient, and I want people to laugh. That was, and please learn and ask me anything that you, or any questions you might have, and let's learn about it together. And but I had very little information initially. I just knew that I was in a significant amount of trouble. So by the time they did the testing of the actual cell division, it was incredibly fast. And the fact that it was in the blood vessels, the lymph nodes and stuff like that, it was a messy situation.
And then you
So,
obviously
but it was
you underwent treatment, you underwent surgery.
sorry.
Yeah.
So my first steps were sort of because it had spread, we couldn't do the surgery initially. So I started off with chemo. So I had my port surgery. So they insert a chemo port, which is fantastic. I would always recommend that if ever you have to have that experience. And so I did the port surgery on a Tuesday. It was the 3rd of September. I was diagnosed about mid-August. And so by the 3rd of, but it's a lot of scans and you sort of struggle to get oncologists. So it's a whole process to finally get to the point of treatment. And obviously with your medical insurance and all of that involved. So the 3rd of September, I went for my surgery. Immediately when I woke up, they started the first chemo. And that was a Tuesday. On the Friday was my divorce court date. So I had to appear in court. And thankfully it was settled. But because I said to my husband, I was the one that initiated it. So I would be the one to appear. And I asked the lawyers just to expedite it so that I can meet that promise, because that was a promise I made. So, but I wasn't sure how long I was still able to do that. So that was on the Friday, and the Saturday I shaved my hair, and because I didn't have the guts to wait for it to fall out, and so it was an eventful period, and yeah, so it was it actually ran really smoothly initially. It was 16 rounds of chemo, or 16 sessions. So you have cycles and all of that. But I initially did what we called Red Devil chemo. So it's a type of chemo. We call it Red Angel because it truly does save lives. And then I went over to a different site, different treatment regimen later on because you can only do 4 of them. So I went on to Taxol and carboplatin. So it's a chemo combination, 2 chemos together with immunotherapy. And that somehow, by God's grace, it definitely, what we could see, the breast tumor was tiny. That was what was frightening. The breast tumor was so tiny, but it was up against the chest wall. But for some reason, it just spread into the lymph nodes. So, it even spread into lymph nodes by the clavicle as well. So it was that obviously the further it gets away from the actual breast tissue, the more dodgy it becomes. So yeah, and after chemo, I'd had a 3-week break. So normally they wait at least a month, but we basically rushed to surgery to try and sort of shorten the risk period of perhaps if there was still active cancer cells, that it would spread further. So and during surgery, so I did the double mastectomy and an initial phase of reconstruction, and it's it was, and then developed an infection during this process, and it was like the most random thing out of, just likely from tap water. So there was the risk of then actually them having to open up again and basically just flatten the chest and close it up until, because I was still meant to go for radiation. But thank God when they did when they did all the removal of the the lymph nodes, and they removed about 7 of them, and and obviously the breast tissue, no sign of cancer was found, which was absolutely amazing. That was the best case scenario, particularly in my instance, because there was so much at that stage, particularly under the arm.
Incredible.
So, and then, so I had the period of just recouping after surgery and then went into radiation. It was about 15 sessions of radiation. So it's every day for 3 weeks. And I finished all of that about 2 weeks ago. So it was quite a long journey. I had a lot of postponements because I had struggled with my white blood cells. So I always joked, by the time the oncologist met me, I was looking really fit and healthy. But I would always tell them that my bone marrow sort of gave me away, that I had lived a very poor lifestyle for many years. It's like my bone marrow remembered. And it just wouldn't, it just didn't want to regenerate. So I was like, it remembers I was fat and happy at a stage. Or rather fat and unhappy. But yeah, so I always say the body keeps score. So, you can do all these fancy diets and fancy things, but your body remembers. You can, as I say, on paper, and on the last session of chemo, I actually showed the doctor what I used. Oh, actually, not my last. It wasn't chemo. It was actually it was the checkup after the surgery. And I said to her, I always pushed you about, can I exercise? Can I, what am I supposed to eat? And and she, and I said, this is why I asked you that, because this is what I was before, and this is why it's so important for me to maintain health. And she said, well, that's a different patient that I would have dealt with. And I never would have found the cancer. It wouldn't have been detectable for me at that stage until it was way too late.
Well,
So yeah,
so
so it's
wild how it led, like how you change your identity, started getting healthier to help you find an underlying, more serious issue, at least physically, that could have impacted your ability to continue living, let alone thrive. So have met Chris. You're doing one-on-one coaching. You have just withered off of all the medications you were taking for the false diagnosis of of bipolar. So now you have more mental clarity than probably you've had in some time, but it also allows you to feel some pretty significant emotions that maybe you've felt in some time. I would love to hear kind of your mindset through treatment and experiencing despair, experiencing some of those challenging emotions, and what that was like, considering you had gone over a decade of maybe not feeling them in the same way. Challenging, beneficial, good, bad, and ugly.
I would say initially, I I honestly didn't fear, and I throughout the journey I never felt fear. So because I said to God, this is, this is yours. My first and last day. So the outcome is none of my business, frankly. So I will leave that up to you. But I would love it to be a journey that someone learns from, that something beautiful will come from, and that there will be growth, even if it's not for me, but for someone else. And but it was, so that was sort of that was my deal with God at that stage, just to say, please, that's what I ask for out of this journey. And so the fear was non-existent for some reason, and I was semi. It sounds weird. I was so excited to fight for my life. I was so grateful. I would go to the chemo room, and everybody would always laugh because the nurses would say, "Why do you always look so damn happy to be here?" Because everybody dreads it. I said, "I have an opportunity to fight." A lot of people like these was triple negative, and that's why it's got such a terrible reputation. Is it sort of catches the young ones, and the people before their regular mammograms, etc. It's known for going, a younger demographic, and you often find it too late. I said, so I have the opportunity. There would have been nothing worse if I pitched up and they said, "Sorry, we can't do anything for you." I had the opportunity to fight. I wasn't concerned whether I was winning or not. It was just the opportunity to pitch up. And so I always say, I'm so grateful just for the opportunity to fight. And it was, so I was really, it was also sort of alerted, or I felt so different to the year prior. The year prior, I was still so desperately frustrated with myself and unhappy, and in a level of despair of just my inability to change, and inability to show up for myself, and inability to live authentically, that I felt a year later, this is such a step up. It's terrible circumstances. It's like it couldn't have been written more poorly, but I felt so privileged to now be in a position to want to fight for my life, as opposed to wanting to take it. Because a year prior to, I was very sort of really exploring the option of just taking it. So I would have died by my own hand, never seeing what the future held. And now, as I say, the way you describe it is extremely funny, because I mean, it's like, oh, shame, this poor girl, she went through this whole process just to get cancer. But it was such a wonderful thing, because it was, my goodness, a year prior to that, if I had cancer then, I would have been like a naughty child saying, "But now I want it. Now I want to live," whereas I was really desperately unhappy, and didn't want to live. And that had been the case for many, many years. So it was always sort of this persistent, this suicidal ideation was unfortunately a persistent companion for me. And whereas during that coaching journey, it was a thing of, this is simply not the way you get to die. So sorry, that's no longer part of your identity. It's off the table. So now you have to actually face your life, and you have to deal with your shit and actually resolve things. You can't, that is not an option. And so it was such a stark contrast to when I found the cancer versus where I'd been basically a year prior to, where I felt honored to fight for my life, because I had built a life that I was proud of. I'd lived authentically, and I'd made decisions that were good for me, but that I knew were good for others as well, but that propelled me to actually fulfill a purpose. So I was so comfortable with whatever the outcome was. So I never felt done in by it. I never felt, I was going to say, oh, why me? I never felt it was unfair. I think I lived a terrible lifestyle before. So, I'm not saying I was deserving of the cancer, but it was an issue of, I honestly didn't think it was unfair. It could happen to anyone. And I was so grateful that I was as healthy as I was physically, mentally, and spiritually, to now to actually have a completely different mindset during this, and to see the positive, and to see the growth, and to pursue. And I didn't now have to start making changes, and now start, almost planning for the end, and doing all the things I wanted to, because what if I don't make it? I had started in that direction already, not knowing that I was sick, but I'd gone into that. I started the authentic living portion of my life. So I was so comfortable with the outcome. So I would not have faced the cancer in exactly the same way that I did the year prior to. It would have been, it was such a wonderful example of God's timing and preparation. So I went into it really strong and physically and mentally healthy. But the pitching up, I was initially, my mind got stuck on the fact that I looked at other people and there would be people coughing or whatever, just random people in the street. And I said to my mom, those are sick people. That's what sick people looks like. But somehow I'm dying. So my mind refused to compute. It just didn't make sense to me because I really was healthy. And otherwise, I got from the stage 3C cancer. So, and so it was a mind shift. And then pitching up for treatment that would decimate your body. And we knew, like the oncologist said, I'm throwing the kitchen sink at you at this point. So we're going to do it and let's see, and I was willing. I was like, I'll do anything. It's fine. But obviously to a point, I wasn't willing to give up quality of life because that would be giving up sort of my ability to still fulfill a bit of my purpose in the meantime. So, but your body is decimated during that process. Cancer unfortunately kills you, but chemo really does decimate your body. So by the end of the chemo, all my blood counts had fallen. I always struggled with the white blood cells during, from fairly early on, but later on it was platelets. I was just bleeding. It was not an elegant process. The issue of, as much as I was a sport about the hair thing and that, it was tough. It's a bit of an undignified sort of process of losing all your feminine features eventually, because you don't have never mind, scalp hair. You don't have lashes. You don't have brows. You don't have like everything. I sort of always said, like, I'm literally the closest thing to a transvestite at this point because they're going to remove these as well. It was such a frustration because I was like, nothing about me. I had no natural feminine features anymore. And to see, and there was like, I always pitched up, fully makeup, fully wigged up. I called it the poodle and the toy pomp and whatever. I always had names for the wigs and stuff, but it was, so I made it. I just didn't want to appear as sick as I was. And it was a thing of just at least let my appearance still show or reflect my strength of character at that point and my strength and my resolve. But my physical strength was nothing. But it helped me to a point. But at night, after wiping off everything I painted on or stuck on or whatever the case may be during the day, it was a stark contrast and it was truly a shadow of yourself. But there was a sense of loss definitely in it because I felt that it was a life interrupted at that point, but I got over that fairly quickly. It was sort of, I realized soon it was more preparation for something else. But there was a sense of loss. There was a sense of frustration because at some point I was still very adamant in the beginning to continue pursuing my goals. My other goals, this cancer thing, we'll sort that out on the side. That's not how it works. I'm afraid. So you will have to, you have one enemy at that stage and you fight that one enemy. And to try and think that you will have the energy for anything else, unfortunately, that's not the case. And it's, and I just decided to be in the experience I allowed myself to, if I was feeling despondent or if I was just exhausted or if I was feeling sad, because there are bouts of immense sadness in it. It's not, and it's just a question of your physical, watching yourself wither away, your physical capability and just seeing life around you carry on, and you still don't know what the outcome is going to be. And it's like, at some point you feel like, everybody is just, their lives are just sort of racing ahead. I hated some of the calls eventually joining with Chris and them because it's a performance platform. It's like it's a performance community. And, and then some weeks I couldn't even, or some months I couldn't even go for the chemo because my white blood cells, I'm like, I had one job and that's to go for the chemo. And I was unable to because my white blood cells weren't enough. So, and for that to be your biggest, I just want to say, achievement for the week, that was such a, those wins and challenges that he would always ask you about. So it was a very confusing time, and it was spectacular at the same time.
One of my
So
favorite
because
things
I
about
met the most amazing people.
One of my favorite things about you is your ability to reframe any circumstance, any conversation into something that is practical, empowering, and potentially positive if you decide to use it that way. You, of course, have gotten really good at it in your own life, but you add that to conversations that we have on our group calls quite often. You saying that you were excited that for the opportunity to fight for your life is just such a beautiful quote. I love everything about that. And of course, that could be in response to a really large form of hardship like a cancer diagnosis, but that can be true for any type of challenge or just
Mhm.
also being alive. Like you can fight for your life and fight for your ability to thrive every day too with that kind of mindset. And you apply that to so many
Absolutely.
conversations all the time. But you also like the way we talked about it recently, how you reframed, like, I was in the best physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health that I ever been. So how lucky am I to get a cancer diagnosis right now when I'm ready to fight? Because, like you said, the medication, the treatments, it will break down your body, and your physical health is going
Yeah,
to support your mental health, even if you have the spirit underneath of it. It's going to be challenging no matter what because of what you just alluded to.
absolutely.
And also, like, what amazing timing when you have now solidified or at least really and significantly developed your internal identity because your external identity was taken away from you from the treatment. So you lost all these aspects of your femininity and who you were on the outside, but you had that inside core. And like every time I talk to you, hear more of these layers about these challenges because you would not know it talking to you. And sometimes we do need to lie to ourselves. We need those affirmations and those mantras just to keep our mindset where we can control. And those lies become like anything else. You hear a lie long enough, you start to believe it. Why not tell ourselves
Mhm.
empowering lies? But you're not lying when you talk to us in the group and when you talk in general. And that's because you have done this long enough in response to some of the hardest pills life can deliver. But what was really interesting too is you talked about this opponent that you had in the cancer. You, of course, had the divorce happening too and all of your past trials. But as you started kind of shift, not we don't know the outcome. We don't know tomorrow, but I love I love your faith and how you did give it up to God as far as the outcome goes, so you could focus on what you could manage. But as things became a little more
Mhm.
manageable, if you will, or maybe the outcome was I may not die. So the opponent became not all encompassing, and you were able to take a step back and start seeing the smaller cancers in your life, the smaller problems. They didn't get any easier. If
Yeah.
anything, you've alluded to the fact that they felt harder. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I was surprised closer to the end of treatment that if I'm saying closer to the end, it was actually during surgery already where I picked this up. Is I thought that by that time I knew that I had a very good chance of surviving. So because we had prior to surgery, I already know that it had shrunk significantly, but we weren't sure whether it was gone completely. So I found during or especially especially for the surgical portion of it, I started realizing that I had built incredible resilience, emotional resiliency in relation to big crisis. But I was so easily then taken down by small things, So almost like the minor, because people with that infection, for example, that I got during, I mean, the surgeon said to me, "Listen, but you've beat this thing, So this is a small thing in comparison." And yes, that is true, but I really needed this to go right, So it was sort of my ability to you sort of in fighting that big fight. Unfortunately, I thought I would be. I always joke, it's like I'm always surprised by how kids' energy levels continue to increase late into the night. I was very surprised by having a bunch of kids over at my house once, and in this instance, it was my emotional resiliency. I was fantastic in dealing with a big enemy, but I was really struggling to deal with the little things. And I had to go and almost relearn to deal with small crises, things that weren't life and death. Because those things were sort of really tripping me up. And I never expected that. I expected, following this big crisis, like I would be a liar, like that nothing would ever throw me. But meantime, I was being like really tripped up by the smallest things, and I was embarrassed by that, and I was almost distrusting of myself and my ability to now face normal daily life. So, and then as treatment like really progressed, and I was done. there was this immense, like, oh my goodness, what now? You know, and I remember being so excited always for my friends that were finishing their chemo, and I would be like, and their treatment regimens, and I would be, and you think that you would just like blast into life, but you are left standing there thinking, what on earth just happened for 11 months? And where do I start rebuilding? Because guess what? Even cancer, and even a stage 3 very aggressive cancer, it doesn't erase life's problems. The problems you had before, and the issues you had before and that you didn't deal with, they are still waiting there for you. They were just temporary. They were very polite in just being in the queue of waiting issues to be dealt with. And they didn't disappear. So I had to face up to those things. So certain, like, but the divorce, those were little things I thought, thinking, no, the cancer will just change my mindset so much. It will be an absolute non-issue even afterwards. That's not how it works. Cancer just temporarily pauses everything, and those things resurface when it's done, and it makes quite a comeback. So, and it was sort of now processing, listen, this is the life I'm facing. Whatever issues I had and problems I had before, they still await me. I'm a little bit fatigued from this last battle. And how do I approach this and not be fearful of everything? Because I've now seen how badly things can go wrong, because there are a lot of ups and downs within a cancer journey. Cancer is incredibly smart. It can change in nature. It amazed me. I understand now why they didn't give me any sort of predictions before. And as an example, I still have my chemo port in, and we're going to leave it in for 2 years because I was warned that my rate of return is really, really high. So, and if it comes back, it comes back quickly. And it's, unfortunately, if it does come back in any other area than breast tissue or lymph, I am terminal. So, and it is, so I have a fairly significant risk in that. So it's sort of having that looming. So you feel really pressured to live, but you are almost, it felt fearful, but I just realized my body was incredibly anxious to return to familiar environments, and not repeat the same mistakes. So, because I had established an incredible trust in God, an incredible repertoire of Him proving that His timing is perfect, His provision is perfect. I mean, I shared with you earlier that things were coming together so nicely during the cancer thing that I actually thought maybe I was going to die, because everything was just working out and sort of like there was like literally wrapping up so beautifully. And it was that I honestly thought maybe this might just be it, and but what a blessing. But yeah, this is it. And going back to your old life, as a very different person, but you still, in some respects, people, you look and present the same, but you are fundamentally changed by the experience. I definitely found my purpose, and it's something I pursue, and it's not necessarily related to my career. But I have to now not go repeat old patterns of behavior and thought, etc., that might very well get me back into that chemo room, if I allow it to spiral again, and if I allow stress to hold me. So I really needed to, I was thrown by issues of emotional resilience, or just being so capable of dealing with big crises, but almost being thrown by the smallest things. But I only had to face one enemy. Cancer is a wonderful reprieve from a multitude of enemies. So you face one enemy at a time, and you are very protected and very well supported during that thing. And you find a level of faith and religious intimacy that you wouldn't have otherwise found. But taking that back into a normal environment, it doesn't translate the same. So, and I realized that I was just chomping at the bit to retake the reins from God and say, okay, I've got this now. Let Him forward. Thanks, we sorted out the life and death situation. But I was so close to just simply resuming old patterns. And that would have negated the entire experience. But it left you with a moment of what on earth was this about? This 11th month process. And guess what? Nothing disappeared. I still had to deal with all my old shit. And I used that period, that last bit of treatment, because at least my energy levels had then increased. So I used that last treatment and I went into each room of the house and I started repacking everything, going through all the old paperwork, etc., facing the old memories, dealing with it, accepting my responsibility and role in it and where it went wrong, etc. And I packaged it and I accepted it and I moved forward. And it was literally room for room that I dealt with it in that way. And so it was almost the hardest period. It was closer to the end of treatment when I realized, okay, I'm making it. And now what? Now how am I going to truly make sense of the journey and make it count, and then live with the possibility of a swift return back there. So it's an interesting thing to navigate, and I stuck through it by God's grace. At some point, I had some harsh words there, and I just needed to stick it out a little longer. And like I said to you before, I think it's literally just, he was just like, my child, like you gave me that one. Why didn't you just release the little things to me as well? And he brought me to a point where I realized, like, I don't want control. I don't want the reins on even the smallest crisis, whether it's traffic, whether it's what. He must truly be in surrender. And it was an issue for me of establishing. I said on the call the other day, God needed to be my first and last love, and establishing that He was truly my soul source. And we met each other there. So it was almost it was the hardest portion of the journey, but even the most meaningful.
And I find it so interesting that you actually used a very similar strategy that you used with the cancer. And you used the word surrender a few times when it came to your faith, relationship with God. You surrendered the outcome. You surrendered everything outside of your control to God and whatever is determined by God. And then that allowed you to focus on what you could control. And I got a good buddy and beautiful writer on Substack, Kevin Stark, who just had a really good piece on the word surrender. Which in many ways, the way I took it is just extreme acceptance of all things outside of your control. Because, like all words, you can have like negative connotations of some words, and surrender is definitely, particularly in the military, one of those words. And don't get me wrong, there's times where you can't surrender, and where you can't surrender, which you alluded to, would be the things you do have control over, like your life, like suicidal ideation,
Your attitude.
or those other things.
Yeah.
Like, don't surrender there. No, that's where be excited to fight. But the things outside of your control, surrender is a beautiful word. That's extreme acceptance in all way, because we can't control most things outside of ourselves. And you actually applied that strategy to all these smaller opponents in your life when the larger opponent was becoming a little clear, a little bit well managed. And it is interesting and ironic how we have to orient to our biggest problems when they're there. And it requires all of us to respond effectively to large problems. But those smaller problems don't feel like they should require our orientation. They shouldn't also be frustration, which you never want to use the word should. I talk about that a lot. If you're shitting all over yourself, you're probably not affecting yourself very positively. But no, even the small guys, they build up over time when you don't orient yourself to them, acknowledge them, and figure out how to manage them effectively. Coming back to surrender and whatever that problem may be, of this is outside of my control. A lot of the things that I do have my control, I can apply here in the same way I do to life's biggest trials. And that was a beautiful example that you gave of just forgetting the lessons you learned based on the severity of the opponent, if you will.
Absolutely. I think because I realized during the cancer, it's really very little you have control over. Because even with, I can have the same cancer as the person next to me, and I saw this. We have the same cancer, we behave completely differently on treatment. Our cancer behaves completely differently to treatment. And it's not that it was, so there's very little that you can control during that journey. And in life, I saw there's very little I can control. The only thing that I could control was my willingness to pitch up, and choosing joy. So choosing the way I would experience it. And I was determined from the beginning, it wouldn't just be a tragic experience. It wasn't something, I didn't want it to be awful. I didn't want it to be tragic. I wanted something beautiful to come from it. And I was able to find joy in it. Happiness is like, happiness is overrated, because that's like this persistent state of being. Joy is something you choose. Like you can choose to find laughter and humor in a moment. You can choose to to find the beautiful things. You can choose to show up for other people in that moment, etc. So I realized that I was able to determine my experience of it. I wasn't able to determine the outcome or control the outcome, but I was able to control the way I was going to experience it, and how I would at least you know be perceived in that, and whether I could make a contribution during that time. And to me, it became a calling of making it an easier ride for someone next to me, that perhaps didn't have the privilege I had of gaining that mental and physical strength prior to. But amazingly enough, everybody was more or less in the same position in saying I was physically as strong as I'd ever been. And I would always say, and they would say, it's so unfair. And I was like, no, it's not. It's literally just, it could have happened to anyone, and how beautiful is God's timing. And everybody was always disarmed by that. And people would look at me because I would arrive, like this. And so people almost didn't take me seriously initially until they saw the type of chemo. The red devil chemo, by the way, is red. So when they saw the chemos, they realized, okay, no, this, she's probably in a bit of trouble. And then when I would share my story, they would be actually alarmed. They would normally go, shit, like my situation's better than yours. And I'm like, I'd love to be in a situation where mine is not compared as the worst case scenario. But they would immediately be disarmed by the fact that, listen, just look at the perfect timing. How much grace is there that you were as healthy as possible going into this journey? Imagine if you weren't, and being decimated and your treatment having to be stopped because your body couldn't take it. That's much worse. So, and that normally disarmed people, and I would always say to new patients, please don't get stuck by why. There's no reason. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It can happen to anyone. Whether it's our fault or not, yes, could it be environmental? I don't have the gene. I don't, and triple negative patients normally do have the gene. Not all people with a cancer gene get triple negative breast cancer, but it's normally got a strong genetic, but I don't have it. Mine was very likely lifestyle of way back, and it is what it is, So but the moment of acceptance, but it's a radical acceptance of the outcome, and then just saying, but I'm going to choose my experience of this. That was incredibly freeing and empowering to me at the same time.
Everything happens for a
And it was
reason.
effective.
Very effective. Everything happens for a reason, but we get to choose that reason. And you're talking about choice so much. And basically, joy is a feeling, and like any other feeling, much easier said than done. But feelings really are choices. Like you said, happiness, that's an emotion. A lot of the other emotions, those are natural. You're going to experience emotion very naturally based on how we've evolved in our physiology. But those emotions then become colored by our feelings, or the mindsets that influence them, and or the mental states that we become aware of and decide to change or not. And again, you're a walking example of that. And it's beautiful how your prayer to God was, the outcome's in your hand, but find a way to give me strength so I can make this experience impactful, maybe for others. And then we were talking about this recently, what you just shared, how in treatment, you're sharing your story like you're doing today with your empowering perspectives, helping reorient people to what it is. And rather than asking why, deciding what that why is. And that is just a story we decide to tell ourselves. And it's such a beautiful thing. And another thing we were talking about yesterday was mantras. And as you heard, I love mantras. And that is what I try to actively train when I create my own self imposed adversity. So when life inevitably gives us some, that's what calls up. That's my reaction rather than fuck or whatever it may be, some
Yeah.
negative feeling that only makes it worse. So, how can we optimize what our self talk is to empower ourselves to
Yeah.
respond effectively? I'm a big believer in training that, but of course, you can go into stressful environments like behind the wheel of a car, difficult conversation, you name it, or each treatment you're going in with some of these in mind. But as we had this great conversation yesterday, you said one of the coolest mantras I've ever heard. So what was that mantra, and when did you come up with it and start using it?
Was it was it a crude one? So I asked Nick Lavery to he obviously faced significant adversity, and I asked I approached him and asked him if he, like, during treatment, at some point it obviously got hard. So it was before I even started with treatment. So I said at some point it probably got really, really hard. So what did you say to yourself in those moments? And so what his mantra actually um, was, and sorry, that I didn't mention yesterday. So what his mantra was is this is the cost of admission. He kept on telling to himself like he wants to go back to war, so that's his as a special forces soldier. So he wanted he would continue to say whatever unpleasant treatment he was receiving or situation he had to endure, that this is the cost of admission. So I and he's so when I also told him, he went Roger that. And then he said, "This is the price of it, or the cost of admission." So I had that engraved on a dog tag. But then he said to me, "So not now you decide. Just strap the fuck in and fight." So and that I also had engraved on that. Um, and it was such a big. And my mom, she was sort of very sort of alarmed that someone would speak to me like that. And I was like, Mom, this is exactly the advice I need. I don't need anyone to beautify this for me. This is exactly strap in and fight. And that was truly the case. So I would always share that with other patients is this is the cost of admission and strap the fuck in and fight. And as conservative as they might be and wouldn't swear, old to young always laughed because it was such a true thing. There isn't another approach in this. You just have to strap the fuck in. So even, if I get all sort of poopy faced about the some of things, I would just always go, Nadia, strap in. Like just, and we would always laugh about it because it couldn't have been truer. There isn't a different approach. We can
Eh,
say, oh, just do your best. Or, this will be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. Just strap the fuck in and fight. We'll deal with whether it's fine or not later. So,
I mean, a good mantra
yeah.
in and of itself would be strap in and fight. But when you added fuck, it's just going to make it that much more memorable. It's going to make it funny. And humor is also a skill that can cause a lot of resilience. When you can laugh when adversity is present, my goodness, are you in a good place to respond effectively? So I love everything about strap the fuck in and fight. I will remember that forever. I'm going to start trying to train that myself to encourage it, to think of you, to laugh, and to also do exactly what it's saying. Because no wonder you
Look,
talk about being excited to fight for your life when you have that kind of talk feeding into your soul and your mind and your body in response to the red devil in treatment, the all the other things happening in your life on top of the main opponent you're fighting. No wonder you have the spirit you do. You have cultivated that yourself. You have created your identity. It's just such a beautiful thing. That's why I love being on these calls when you're on them because we'll have these conversations about whatever it may be, and I just love hearing how you reframe things. I love hearing your take on it and your perspective because you're speaking from personal extreme adversity in so many different domains: the physical, the mental, the emotional, and also the spiritual throughout your life, getting you to where you are today. And now you're letting it impact other people. And I haven't told the story yet, but our first conversation, it was we were on and they were talking about some of the guys were talking about the six pack challenge. So they're talking about, as you know, they're talking about what they're going to do. And I don't even know all the rules or how it goes about, but basically they're trying to encourage better physical health and maybe get closer to having a six pack in whatever way they're going to do it. And they're trying to figure out how much time they're going to do it and what kind of diets they're going to go on. And at some point, you were so funny and you're very matter of fact way, like, guys, what are we doing here? If you're gonna go on some like crazy keto diet, are you gonna sustain that for life? Like, what's the fucking point if you are not gonna truly
Yeah.
change your relationship with food or what you're doing? If you're just doing it for some
Yeah.
picture at the end, what are we doing? And then you had a quote in there that everybody loved. You're like, I truly believe if, like, in today's day and age, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember how you said it, but like in today's day and age, obviously with abundance and our access to food, that is without question, it's fantastic that we don't have people starving the same rates they used to. We don't have people having to go out and get it. There are limitations to that, of course. There's a lot of purpose in having to get your own food, and
Mhm.
great to do that when you can. But we're also very lucky to not have to. But in today's day and age, if you can manage your relationship with food, you can probably manage your relationship in form of any other urge or any other adversity. So you said that in some way, shape, or form, and like that was my first experience with you. I was like, man, talk about some wisdom there. But you checked all these guys
Yeah.
talking about trying to get six packs. Like, nah, what are we doing? If you're not doing it to beyond this challenge, that's great. You're doing something hard, but do things that you can sustain over time. You're of course speaking from experience, but that if you can manage your relationship with food, you can probably manage your relationship with any other urge or adversity in this life. Beautiful stuff.
Look, I think I even said to them before that, how would you guys feel if I joined it and I but I did bulimia. Would you guys be okay with that? Because I'm going to be at the same point. Like, I'm going to lose a significant amount of weight. Would you guys be okay? Because they were talking about these extreme ways of bulking. And I'm like, did your body keep score? So, okay, I'm going to lose weight, but I'm going to do it by purging. So is everybody okay with that? And you could see everybody was like, not so okay with that. I'm like, exactly. It's not a healthy way of getting there. So let's not do it by way of an eating disorder. It will bring me to the same point. I will lose weight, but what will I lose is my health. So, let's make it a part of our identity. Let's make it an issue of self-respect as opposed to being a one-time six-pack challenge, winner. Like, and just, Carl, to be quite honest, it's much easier doing it that way, making it part of your identity because it becomes semi-effortless. It's just something that naturally occurs through your consistent showing up for yourself behavior. And it doesn't require these extreme things. And there's longevity in it and sustainability in it. So it becomes core to who you are, and it becomes a very natural consequence of your behavior. So, or we can just do it by bulimia. We can do that too.
It was so funny.
Because
And
that's literally what they were describing. They would just, because they had these weird extreme ways. And I was just like, that just doesn't sound, this is not what we're promoting. We're promoting, sort of excellence, but it's an excellence in raising the standards for yourself and truly in becoming that person. So it was, I remember my mom, the first time she came to visit after I went through this process, obviously when she arrived, so I was like much thinner, but she said to me, okay, no, we'll eat very well. We won't eat cake or we won't eat this. And I said, Mom, I don't have an eating disorder. I'm not afraid of food. I just make healthy choices, but I eat whatever I want, but I just balance it out and I'll, up my exercise and those types of things. I said, so I'm not afraid of food. I have a good relationship with food. So if we feel like cake, we have the cake. It's not, it won't kill us. So, and it was literally, it was, I never felt deprived or anything because it was truly just part of who I was.
you just added intention to your life. Like every choice you were making was made consciously in relation to your identity and your values. And when you do that again from the inside out, some of these hard choices or some of these urges that we have terrible relationships with, they become much clearer for what they are. And if you add a little intention, are you going to change overnight? Maybe in some way, like you lie to yourself about like who you want to be one day, and you start seeing things through your perspective differently overnight, like you alluded to before. But no,
Yeah,
the scale's not going to change.
absolutely.
Scale's not going to change overnight. Your appearance is going
No.
to change overnight, and whatever your reasons are for wanting to do that change. Again, going back to like your low bar in the medical realm, we can also set really low bars for ourselves. You mentioned how you just didn't want to lie to yourself anymore. Like you were lying to you would say you'd set this goal for the day, and then you'd lie to yourself or you'd break that goal right away. That self integrity. I think that's such a great low bar that we can all set for ourselves. Intentions
Yes.
behind your choices, just living a little more consciously. Like we can all, again, simple, not easy. It does require a shift in how you live, but those small things, that low bar we can set for ourselves, can eventually lead to thriving and maybe some of the limitations that we have in the medical realm, which of course we need the medical realm to keep us alive. But we need ourselves, we need our identities to help us thrive. And you are a walking example of that. And it's so fun to be on these calls with you, learning more about you. After that call where you punked everybody, I was talking to my wife. I was like, you got to listen to this Nadia chick. She's the coolest chick in the world. And it's only half the story, apparently. I don't know anything yet. And I've gotten to know you more. I'm so thankful for your friendship. God answered your prayer. You are helping more people day in and day out. And I'm so grateful that you talked to me today to share your story, so more people can hear it. And I look forward to continuing to get to know you more over time. We've been talking for an hour and a half already. Time flies by. Um, Thank you so much, Nadia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can I just add one thing? So, as much as I believe in positive affirmations and all of that, it only takes you so far. So the only way I was truly able to change is to acknowledge what my role was in certain things, what part I played, etc. So I needed to go and face the ugliest bits of myself, the ugliest reasons why I refused to change, the ugliest, and not blame anyone else. So of course there were things that occurred that wasn't my fault necessarily or whatever, but at all times I had a part to play in it. So even the bipolar diagnosis, was it wrong? Yes, they made a mistake. but I should have known myself better, and I should have advocated for myself better, and I should have been not been so willing to accept that diagnosis. So, and that is something that I carry forward. And even with the cancer was an issue of advocating for myself, advocating for the right treatment, the best treatment, but also not over medicating. In other words, where a doctor starts managing their risk as opposed to mine. So it was, you know, but it required, as I always say, the coaching journey, etc. It wasn't pretty, because it truly required of me to go and dissect my decision making, dissect who I was, why I was where I was, and accept my role in it, forgive myself for it, etc. So today, I don't believe in living in defiance of anything or being rebellious or anything. But the one thing I do act in defiance of, or behave in defiance of daily, is the girl that thought that it was okay to end her life, that was an option. So I live in defiance of that. So I had to go and sort of make peace and forgive older versions of myself that served me to a point in decision making. I needed to acknowledge my role. And it's not a question of accepting blame. All about the extreme ownership, blah, blah, blah. It's not an issue of accepting blame. It was an issue of identifying how I got into that position, at which point I could have pivoted and didn't. What did I tolerate that I shouldn't have? And then forgiving myself and obviously taking that lesson into the next situation. So but you will have to be incredibly honest with yourself, and not for the purpose of persecution or, self-persecution or, anything like that. It's an empowerment thing. It's saying, I have the ability to now make a different choice and behave differently and behave counter to my previous patterns. And by that way, in that way, shape, or form, you will end up with a different life, and it will be an authentic life. So, and stop living a life that was meant for someone else, and stop living a life that was meant to make other people happy or satisfy other people. So be willing to face the ugly parts of yourself. So it wasn't all like butterflies and roses. Yeah, did I learn to laugh through everything, etc.? Absolutely. But it required an incredible realization of my role to play in it. And it's not for self-blame, and it's not to wallow in. It was purely to learn the lesson so that I won't repeat or tolerate the behavior again in future.
Beautiful. Like you said, you were using some of these tools, these strategies, whether it's mantras, affirmations, self-talk, all that good stuff. But yeah, it can only go so far. So the integrity followed by the accountability with forgiveness of yourself, so you don't have shame, but can look for the areas of opportunity to apply it to your life going forward. You're an inspiration, Nadia. Thank you so much. This is incredible. Yeah, really enjoyed this.
Thank you very, very much.
Obviously, I'm lucky enough that we're going to keep doing this anyway, but it'll be fun to have more conversations in the future with Chris. I'll put links to Chris's stuff too. It goes without saying. He's incredible. His book, Beyond the Battlefield, amazing. It's one of the best kind of self-improvement, identity cultivation books that I've read. And he's just getting bigger and better every day. And I'm very glad that you're part of the team, and I'm part of that team now. So I can continue to learn from you and continue to share stories with one another. I appreciate you sharing your story today.
No, thank you so much. Can I share one more thing about suicide? So what I learned about
100%.
suicide
Yeah.
was and that was, I think, one of the earliest sort of realizations during my coaching journey, is Chris has been open and sharing on Instagram his evening where he almost took his life, and or really considered it. And I realized at a stage, the last time I wanted to commit suicide, I listened to a Jordan Peterson thing, and he was sort of running through all these, things that or tried to motivate why someone shouldn't do it. And I was like sort of racing through it thinking, no, that one's fine, that one's fine, that one's fine. And then the last thing, because he's like, the normal, the family will sort of miss you and those, the harm you do to other people. But that was one thing. But you reach a level where you think, listen, trust me, I'm doing them a favor. You had that sort of mindset, completely false, etc. But that's what you are able to convince yourself of. And the last thing he said was, just don't be so sure it's your life to take. And I literally threw my pen down on the paper, and I was that's such a good point. And at that stage, I thought it was a religious thing, in the sense of, I interpreted it to be a religious thing. During the coaching, for the first time, I realized I was driving to to work the one day. And Chris and I had a discussion about communication with, between males and females, etc. And how sometimes, males have different boxes that they need to place things in. And sometimes if I provided advice at the office, the men sort of almost seemed slightly annoyed by it. And he said to me, it's an issue of how I needed to reframe the information was to say, if you are ready to consider second and third order effects of the situation, please, bear the following in mind. And because I would give information that I thought was absolutely pertinent, but the guys weren't ready to focus on a full scale, sort of information onslaught. They just wanted, tidbits at that point. Because I'm a legal advisor. So, and I was driving to the office, and Jordan Peterson's thing came up in my mind again about don't be so sure it's your life to take. And I immediately connected with the second and third order consequences of suicide. Family, let's say with Chris as an excellent example, his daughters, that would have been your first sort of order consequences. But second and third order effects, I would have been a second order effect. In other words, if he took his life, he would have taken mine too. Because I didn't have another birthday in me from a mental health perspective. So, and if he took his life, we couldn't be more different, and we couldn't be a more random pairing. Our personality is also different. I'm brash, etc. So I warned him, I'm a 3-ring circus, and he asked himself, how bad can it be? Trust me, I will overperform if you needed me to. But it was a thing of realizing that if he took his life, and similarly, the amount of people that I was able to help, but just not making that choice. And in saying that, don't be so sure it's your life to take. God was incredibly gracious in giving us our lives. Obviously, he had a plan for it and he had a purpose for it. But suicides are often successful because he almost honors your decision. But I said to Chris, would you have been comfortable at the time when you considered, obviously now you have, in a short period, you have this person, this very random person that you managed to give empowered to the point that she lives an incredibly authentic life and a happy life, despite the cancer, despite all of that. You were able to put me in that position. But you now have I just want to say the benefit of actually seeing into the future for all practical purposes. If you knew that you would, by that decision, strip me of that life and of the growth that I had because of you, etc., would you be willing to take mine? And that's the life that you aren't, that's not yours to take. In other words, if I take mine, I take the life of the other person that I was supposed to touch, that I was supposed to guide or inspire or whatever the case may be. And that is a life that you shouldn't be comfortable in taking. And my story is such an interesting story because we're so different. We are so randomly put together. There's no reason. I am the sparkliest person. I'm not the embrace the suck military type at all. I'm very different from that, etc. But somehow God brought two people together there, and he allowed those two lives to be preserved. But if Chris took his life that day, he would have taken mine too. And he would have stripped me of reaching my potential, even if cancer was the end of it. I was so comfortable in facing that end because of the authentic life that I had found through him. So, and that's why with suicide, just please consider the second and third order effect of, it's one thing to be okay with taking your own life, but are you willing to strip off the life and the potential of the people that you were meant to touch in this world and meant to affect in this world? And those lives, those aren't yours to take. So try and remove it as an option.
I'm very glad Chris decided to strap the fuck in and fight back in the day so he could allow you to, and you both make the world a better place. We are lucky for you guys. You share your stories. You make us all better for it. Thank you so much, my friend. Talk soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Keep well, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.